cures and fewer treatments will be available for seniors and for patients. Also, thanks to a natural gas tax and more than $550 billion spent on new Green New Deal policies, Americans can expect to pay higher prices for home heating costs, electricity rates, and gas prices. And keep in mind that heating bills are already expected to be up as much as 54% for some American households this winter. So if President Biden's words are true, and a budget is demonstrative of values, then it's very clear what my friends across the aisle value. It's illegal immigrants. It's bugs and fish, even this concept of tree equity. Those are the values that are prioritized in this budget over the concerns and the needs of everyday Americans, middle class and working class families. So the Democrats' big government socialist spending scam, it's full of radical far-left priorities and will further fuel the highest inflation and the highest spike in prices that we've seen in 4 decades. And sadly, it's going to be American workers, job creators, and families who will be forced to foot this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to insert into the record a November 17th Reuters article entitled, "Ratings Agencies Say Biden's Spending Plans Will Not Add to Inflationary Pressure."
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, just yesterday, economists and analysts made clear that the Build Back Better bill will not add to inflationary pressures. And let me remind those on the other side that there are provisions in this legislation to bolster our supply chains. And if we want to talk about values, our values are that we want to lower the cost of prescription drugs for our senior citizens. And our values are that we think it is outrageous that drug companies charge so much for insulin, a drug that has been around forever, and yet families are being gouged by these drug companies. And there's a provision in this bill that caps insulin costs at just $35 a month. So those are our values. And now we're happy to yield 1 1/2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Neguse.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman, the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, and I thank the Speaker. And with all the respect in the world for my colleague from Pennsylvania, to the extent he wants to talk about Joe Biden's America, let's stick to the facts. In Joe Biden's America, wage growth is up and unemployment is down. In Joe Biden's America, family income is up. Prescription drug pricing is poised to go down. That's why I'm excited to be here today, Madam Speaker, to support the Build Back Better Act and speak in support of this transformative, historic legislation that will inure to the benefit of each and every American. There's a lot to be proud of in this bill. The tax cuts for working families that it will deliver, the jobs that it will create, the costs for working families that it will lower. But for me personally, the part that I am most enthused and excited about is universal pre-K, because as the Speaker knows, I'm a father. I have a young 3-year-old daughter who started preschool this year. And there is nothing that can bring a smile to my face more than seeing my daughter after a day at preschool, seeing how much she has enjoyed it and how much she has learned. We are lucky to be able to send her to school, but many families in Colorado and across the country are not. And thanks to President Biden's vision, universal pre-K for every 3- and 4-year-old in the United States of America will be a reality. So let's pass this bill. Let's send it to the Senate. Let's get it across the finish line, and let's deliver for the American people. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. I just want to cite something that while campaigning for the White House last year, President Biden repeatedly stressed that he would not directly raise taxes on individuals making below $400,000. Analysis by the Joint Committee on Taxation released Tuesday information showing that the House version of President Biden's bill will start raising taxes as early as 2023 on middle-class families. Additionally, tax increases fall heaviest on the lower middle class, while the super wealthy receive a generous tax cut until at least 2025. I know my good friend from Colorado is talking about wages increasing. What's not being considered is that if wages are not increasing at the amount of inflation, people are actually having less purchasing power. So unless your wages have increased by 6.2%, your money earned is actually not what it was just a month or 2 or 3 ago. So yes, wages may be raising, but they're not keeping pace with inflation. So everyday Americans are paying that, what economists call the invisible tax of inflation, which hurts working and middle-class families the most, particularly when you look at the amount they have to pay for gas prices, which are at a 7-year high. By the way, the last time gas prices were this high, President Biden was again in the White House. Additionally, something to consider, that the budget resolution has 3 committees that are well over the budget resolution amount, which I believe is going to cause a problem in the Senate. First, the Committee on Homeland Security was at $500 million in the budget resolution. It's almost 3 times that amount on the current CBO score at just under $1.5 billion. If you look at the Committee on Judiciary, you had a budget resolution number of just about $108 billion. The CBO came back at $115 billion, just over $115 billion, with $369 billion from 2032 to 2041. Then you have the Committee on Oversight, which is almost just as egregious as Homeland Security's number. It was in the budget resolution at $7.5 billion. It's almost twice that at $13.8 billion. I'm not the Senate parliamentarian, but from my understanding, this is going to cause significant issues and bust privilege at the Senate. But Madam Speaker, I just want to talk about the previous question. If we defeat the previous question, I will offer personally an amendment to the rule to strike provisions in this bill allowing millions of illegal immigrants to live and work in the United States indefinitely and setting them on the path toward citizenship. Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, here to explain the amendment is my good friend and my former ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, and I yield him as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, in 10 months, we have went from a secure border to complete chaos. We don't have a border anymore. We don't. We now have what Secretary Clinton said she wanted when she ran for president 5 years ago. We have a borderless hemisphere. You don't believe it? Just look at the numbers. March was the highest month on record for illegal crossings at our southern border, the highest month on record until April. And then April was the highest month on record until May. And then May was the highest month on record until June. June was the highest month on record until July, when 212,000 illegal encounters on our southern border. And this past month went all the way down to 164,000. 1.7 million this year alone. A record. A record. And guess what? Thousands more in a caravan are on their way. And all the terrible things that happen in these caravans are there because of the policies of the Biden administration and the Democrats who control the federal government. But don't worry, don't worry, Secretary Mayorkas said this, quote, "The border is closed, the border is secure." You would laugh if it wasn't so serious, if the effects and what happens to kids and families on these, if it wasn't so bad, if it wasn't, you would almost have to laugh, because there is no way anyone can describe the border as closed and the border as secure. And so in this big spending bill, this $2 trillion monstrosity, what's Democrats' response to that chaotic situation on our border? Amnesty for over 6 million people who are in our country illegally. Think about that. That's their response. Oh, and don't forget what the Justice Department is getting ready to do. The Justice Department, when they're not spying on parents, when they're not treating parents as a domestic terrorist threat, our Justice Department is getting ready to pay people who illegally entered our country $450,000. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's why people all across this country are just throwing their hands up. What is going on? The cost of the immigration policies in this legislation are almost $500 billion over the next 20 years. $500 billion. But again, don't worry. Joe Biden says that $500 billion in spending on immigration policies and all the other spending in this bill, don't worry. Joe Biden says that's going to help the inflation problem. There is not a rational, sane person on the planet who believes that. And why the President of the United States would make such a statement is beyond me. Record high inflation, record highest we've had in 31 years, and Joe Biden says spending $500 billion over 20 years on immigration policies in this legislation and all the other spending, it's going to lower inflation. Let's defeat the previous question when it comes up. Let's defeat the rule, and for goodness sake, I hope we will vote down this bill, which is only going to exacerbate the already terrible situation we have seen. Every single policy that has come from the Biden administrations and the Democrat-controlled Congress has been harmful to American families. We have went, as I said, from a secure border to chaos. We have went from energy independence to the spectacle of the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase production. We went from relatively safe cities to crime going up in every major urban area in this country, and we went from stable prices to a 31-year high in inflation. You want to buy a home? It's going to cost more. You want to rent an apartment? It's going to cost more. Put food on the table? It's going to cost more. Put gas in your car? Going to cost more. Thanksgiving turkey is going to cost more. Christmas presents for your family are going to cost more in Joe Biden's America. This bill is so bad. Vote down the previous question. Vote down the rule. Vote down this bill for the good of the families of this great nation. With that, I yield back to the gentleman from Pennsylvania and thank him for the time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have to tell you, I think what's on display here really is the difference between Democrats and Republicans. I mean, this Build Back Better bill is about our values and about what we're for, about solving problems. And what we hear from our Republican friends is hate and vitriol, blaming Joe Biden for everything. It's a cloudy day out. It's Joe Biden's fault. I mean, everything. But no solutions, nothing that they're for. We passed an historic infrastructure bill 2 weeks ago. It's going to help rebuild our country. The overwhelming majority of my Republican friends voted against it, and the few that voted for it are now under attack by the Republican leadership and are being threatened with losing their committee assignments. I mean, that is their response to our infrastructure challenges. When the previous president, Mr. Trump, was in office, we had Infrastructure Week, Infrastructure Month, Infrastructure Press Release, but no infrastructure money. Thankfully, because of the leadership of this president and members of this Congress who voted for it, we have an infrastructure bill. And you know, when you talk about policies that they're against, I mean, really, you're against the extension of the child tax credit, which has decreased child poverty by almost 30%? Are you against increasing the Pell Grants? Are you against investing in affordable housing? Are you against dealing with the climate crisis? Are you against, universal free pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds? I mean, are you against expanding the earned income tax credit? I mean, are you against making historic investments in historically black colleges and universities? I mean, I can go on and on and on, but these are the things we're for. What you hear from the other side is what they're against. I think the American people think it's more important for us to tell them what we are for. And what this bill is about being on the side of those who struggle in this country every day. And by the way, there are investments in this bill to deal with our supply chain issues, which can also help with inflation. But I guess they're against that too. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his strong and important leadership on this historic bill. I rise in strong support of the Build Back Better Act and thank the Democratic leadership for their historic investment into the American lives and the lives of their families. We have no future if we don't get serious about combating climate change. And this bill is transformative in this area and so many areas, other areas. The Oversight Committee's title would make the federal government a leader on combating climate change by electrifying the federal government's vehicle fleets. Our title includes nearly $3 billion for GSA and $6 billion for the Postal Service to purchase tens of thousands of electric vehicles and build the infrastructure necessary to support them. Electric vehicles are a sensible and cost-effective investment that will reduce emissions and help save our planet. The title also includes $4 billion for GSA to expand the use of emerging green technologies and to green federal buildings. I'm especially pleased that we've included dedicated funding for OMB to track labor, equity, and environmental standards and performance. It is critical that the House pass this bill as quickly as possible. My time is up and I yield back. Congratulations to everyone who's supporting this critically important bill.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. Madam Speaker, we're all here to represent our constituents. And I don't think it's a coincidence that House Democrats represent all but one of the 25 districts who benefit from the SALT tax provision. That includes Speaker Pelosi's own district. And what this is it's a tax break for millionaires and billionaires. Let's just look at the tax consequences of this bill. Analysis by the Nonprofit Tax Foundation found, and I quote, over 96% of districts across the United States would eventually see a tax increase, end quote, because of President Biden, House Democrats' socialist big government spending spree. 96% of districts will have higher taxes because of that. This hurts the working and middle class. Even the left-leaning Tax Policy Center found that President Biden and Speaker Pelosi's spending spree would raise taxes on middle-class Americans by 30%. That's 30% that you have to take into account when you have inflation at over 6%. In essence, it's a 36% plus tax increase on middle class and working families. This bill, though it delivers tax cuts to some people, and that's 2/3 of the country's millionaires. 2/3 of the millionaires in the United States under this bill actually receive a tax cut. Small businesses also get hurt. They don't get favored like millionaires and billionaires. This includes $400 billion in small business tax hikes, which some argue would take the effective tax rate of small businesses in excess of 57%. Additionally, this bill hires 87,000 new IRS agents that are going to be used to increase audits on everyday working Americans. Nearly half of those audits will impact families earning $75,000 a year or less. About 1/4 will be affected Americans who earn just $25,000 per year. This will damage the working and middle class severely. And this isn't just numbers. We can talk about tax rates all we want, but when Americans go to Thanksgiving Day dinner, they will pay more than ever. If you just look at how much Americans are paying, steak is up 24%. Bacon is up over 20%. Fish and seafood over 11%. Eggs, 11.6%. This will be the most expensive Thanksgiving Day dinner in the history of the United States, thanks to Joe Biden's economy. Madam Speaker, with that, I would yield as much time as he may consume to my good friend and colleague from Ohio, Jim Jordan.
Nice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. The chairman of the Rules Committee said Republicans want to blame Joe Biden for everything. I'm not blaming Joe Biden for everything. The American people are. Polling says, right track, wrong track, polling says 71% of our fellow citizens think our country's on the wrong track. I'm not blaming Joe Biden. They are, the people we represent. Approval rating of 38%. The vice president's approval rating is 28%. In the history of polling for vice president, I don't know if I've ever seen anything that low. It's the American people who are fed up with what they see. Gentlemen, chairs of the Rules Committee said, what are they for? I'll tell you what we're for. I'll tell you what Republicans are for. I think what the American people are for. We're actually for a secure border. Imagine that. We're for lower prices. We actually would like to have real wages be going up like they were under President Trump. We would like to have a secure border like we had under President Trump. We would actually like less crime in our urban areas like we had under President Trump. We would like to be energy independent like we were just 10 months ago. We'd kind of like to not have the spectacle of the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase production. At the same time, your policies in this bill will discourage American companies from increasing production. What do you guys want, $8 gasoline? I'll tell you what we're for. We're for a Department of Justice that doesn't target parents, doesn't target moms and dads, for standing up and saying we don't want this racist curriculum, anti-American curriculum taught to our kids. I'll tell you what we're for. We're actually for not raising taxes on American families. That's what we're for. That's what American families want. They'd like to keep the money they earn, be able to put gas in their car, buy Christmas presents for their family, afford the things that they, just 10 months ago, it was so much different. That's what we're for. I yield back to the gentleman.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I don't even know how to respond to all of that. I would just say to my friends that the American people had what they had to offer. When they were in the majority, we had 4 years of Donald Trump, and guess what? They voted for Joe Biden and gave him a victory by millions and millions and millions and millions of votes. So I don't think they want what they were selling. And I just also say to my friends when who are trying to lecture us on tax policy, my Republican friends can't be serious here. You added $2 trillion to the deficit to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and corporations at the expense of everyone else. It was shameful. It was shameful what my friends did. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Veterans Affairs, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman is recognized.
I
thank the Chair for yielding. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs' contribution to the Build Back Better Act of 2021. The committee has an important responsibility to advance measures that support veterans and honor their service and sacrifice, as well as that of their families, caregivers, and survivors. Last week, we celebrated Veterans Day. The Build Back Better Act is the perfect way to continue to show our gratitude with concrete, meaningful investment for all veterans. By making this critical investment in VA, we can start rebuilding VA's capacity in terms of brick-and-mortar infrastructure, human capital, and support structures that serve our nation's veterans. Now, I have a difficult time believing that my colleagues across the aisle think that veterans are unworthy of this investment. The fact is, veterans from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to Beaufort, South Carolina, from Columbia, Missouri to Clarksville, Tennessee, are among the districts that stand to gain directly from these resources. The most important piece of this legislation is the $1.8 billion for medical facility leases that fixes a long-standing backlog of lease authorizations. Take a look at the VA's budget book, at the leases that are in that list. You will see it largely benefits Republican districts. Do my Republican colleagues not want VA facilities and clinics in their districts? I don't believe that for one moment. And I know that they'll attend the ribbon-cutting ceremonies, though, when this bill is passed into law, and issue press releases when these facilities are open. Voting against this legislation would not only mean turning our backs on our most sacred promise to our nation's veterans, but it would be a striking departure for many of my Republican colleagues who have long advocated for these investments. As demand for care and services at VA continues to grow, the lack of purposeful, usable clinic space will hurt veterans, including women veterans, because clinic spaces are not designed for them. A lack of access to health care providers will hurt veterans because we simply do not have enough providers in this country. Making investments in the next generation of healthcare, providers is just common sense. And I'll end by saying that nearly 3/4 of the American people agree that it is time to update VA's infrastructure. The Build Back Better Act gives us the framework to do just that. Thank you. Now yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague from Massachusetts was talking about taxes. I'll stay here and talk about taxes all day, because at the end of the night, the American people will see that the second biggest provision in this bill is actually a tax break to millionaires and billionaires. Facts are facts. If you look at it, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget found that the SALT tax carve-out would, and I quote, be nearly 50 times as large as the benefit of the expanded child tax credits for a typical family over 5 years, end quote. SALT rewards and gives tax incentives, and tax breaks rather, to millionaires and billionaires in blue states. And who pays for that? Working families all over the United States. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. Okay. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter.
The gentleman is recognized.
This is our moment. Now is the time to deal the working people back in. We need to prove to the people that the government works for them, not just for those on top. Build Back Better lowers family health care costs by strengthening the ACA, capping the price on insulin, adding in hearing benefits for Medicare, and much more. This bill will be transformative for American families. With the child tax credit, child care, and affordable, high-quality preschool, our nation will finally invest in our children. We must address the climate crisis, and we can't leave any community behind. Our health, our culture, and our economy depends on it. We cannot wait another day to build back better for the working families of America. Let's start now. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. One thing we need to address here also is the tax on natural gas. This will increase nearly everything everyday Americans buy. We already know that there's projections that people will be paying more this winter to heat their homes almost than ever before, almost a 50% increase in some places. If you look at the fees in here, the taxes, $900 methane fee, which phases into $1,500 production per metric ton. That just sounds like numbers, but think about it. If we are taxing natural gas, We're taxing Americans who use natural gas to heat their homes. We're taxing the industries that use petrochemicals to manufacture everyday products that we use and manufacture here in the United States, and consumers end up paying that tax as well. We're also making it more expensive to manufacture here in the United States, because as you tax natural gas, it costs more to manufacture goods here at home. Again, the American consumer will end up paying this tax. So these taxes on natural gas will do nothing more than make it harder for Americans to heat their home. It'll make it more expensive to us to manufacture products, to pay for petrochemicals. It will make it harder for us to actually rebuild the economy. With that, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jones.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I am so proud to have played a leading role in securing high-quality, affordable child care for every family in America in the Build Back Better Act. This policy is personal for me. Growing up, I was raised by a single mom who had to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And she got help raising me from my grandparents. My grandmother cleaned homes, and when daycare was too expensive, she had to take me to work with her. Madam Speaker, no family in America, no child in America should have to accompany their guardian to work because childcare is too expensive, certainly not in the richest nation in the history of the world. That's why we're investing nearly $400 billion in childcare and in early learning programs to ensure that we solve this affordability crisis. The childcare provisions will transform our childcare system and help bring unemployed parents back into the workforce without their being financially burdened. For these reasons and so many more, I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this historic legislation. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield the gentleman from Georgia, my good friend, Mr. Clyde, 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my friend from Pennsylvania for yielding. Madam Speaker, this monstrosity of a bill is the most progressive and expensive piece of legislation in our nation's history. It will fundamentally alter the course of our great nation by codifying the far left's dangerous policies, such as components of the Green New Deal, taxpayer-funded abortion, and the weaponization of the IRS. In fulfilling the far left's wish list, this bill bankrupts America. And it does so, Madam Speaker, all while Americans are reeling from record-high rates of inflation that are crippling their pocketbooks, emptying shelves at the supermarket, and making gasoline prices skyrocket. This compounded with the fact that the Biden administration refuses to address the myriad of crises plaguing Americans across the country. I am convinced that my counterparts on the other side of the aisle have no desire to set America up to succeed, nor are they interested in embracing the freedoms that we know and love, the very freedoms that serve as the foundational underpinnings of our great democracy. No, this bill moves
to billionaires and big corporations. Let us instead invest in American workers and families and pass this Build Back Better Act now. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I'm sorry, reserve.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Scanlon.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. For decades, Congress has based economic policy on trickle-down economics. Eviscerating America's middle class in the process. But today, we reject that approach. The Build Back Better Act invests in American families, not hedge funds, in ways that will benefit all of us. I want to mention two investments of particular importance to my district in Pennsylvania: children and veterans. This bill builds upon the American Rescue Plan that we passed in March to expand benefits for families and support for child care. In doing so, it will reduce child poverty more and produce generational benefits to our country. The bill also makes long overdue investments in the aging infrastructure of our Veterans Administration, including upgrading medical facilities and, finally, digitizing service records that are required for veterans and their families to obtain the benefits our nation has promised to them. With this bill, we can create real, sustained economic growth that benefits all Americans, and I'm proud to support it. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just like to note that this bill does not include the Hyde Amendment, which will allow taxpayer dollars to be used to fund on-demand abortions. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, in this season of giving, as we sit down to our Thanksgiving table, I hope the American people will know that we have handed them a gift over corporate greed that has insisted on raising the price of goods. We presented to them the Build Back Better Act. And for those naysayers who want to talk about inflation, Mark Zandi said the bills do not add to inflation pressures as the policies help to lift long-term economic growth via stronger productivity and labor force growth. That's from one of the renowned economists in this nation. What I am fighting for is to make sure that Paula Rodriguez Rosales in Texas has health insurance for the first time in decades. I remember that I cried when we were not able to give all of these uninsured persons insurance. We're giving them health insurance, and we also, as chairwoman of the crime committee, giving community violence dollars to stop the violence. This is a bill we should pass. Support the Build Back Better bill for the American people. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While I have tremendous respect for my colleague from Texas, I just want to point out that according to Moody's Analytics, consumer prices will rise 2.24% higher after the Biden infrastructure and the American Rescue Plan and the Build Back Better spending spree than in a Biden-free economy. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank my friend, Mr. McGovern. When I served in local government, I helped to write and pass 14 consecutive budgets. If I learned one thing from that process, it's budgets are statements of values. When the Republicans last used the budget reconciliation process, it was to pass a $2 trillion tax giveaway to the wealthy. Before that, they used it to rip health care away from more than 20 million Americans. They stated their values loudly and clearly. Well, here are our values in this bill. We value working Americans and are using reconciliation to cut their taxes, not the rich. We value American children and parents and are using reconciliation drastically to lower child care costs, provide paid family leave, and guarantee access to preschool. We value the health and well-being of the American people and are using reconciliation to expand access to vital health services, especially our seniors. And we value our environment and are using reconciliation to make the single largest investment in the fight against climate change in history. These are our values. This is how we build back a better America, not only for the rich and well-connected, but for all Americans. I urge the passage of this important investment in our future. And I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it should be noted that this bill actually impedes and bans domestic energy and mineral production, which will actually increase our dependencies on resource suppliers from OPEC, Russia, and China. I just think that should be noted. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend and colleague from Florida.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my good friend, Representative Reschenthaler. I'm going to read a statement from one of my Democratic colleagues here tonight. Quote, because of last-minute, late-night changes to the latest version of the Build Back Better Act, 2/3 of millionaires would get a big tax cut for the next 5 years under the bill. That's one reason that I refuse to vote for the bill without time to review the changes made to it a little over a week ago. Now we know. The tax benefit to these millionaires over 5 years could be 50 times as large as the benefit that the child tax credits for a typical low or middle income family. The bill spends more on tax breaks for millionaires than on child care assistance, education, seniors, and even more than all of the health care provisions combined. This is from one of our Democratic colleagues. If one of our Democratic colleagues is stating this, then we know that there is bipartisan opposition to this bill, a bill that we know is going to kill every single American's American dream. This is a socialist nightmare that we can simply not afford. 1 in 25 people in this country is here illegally, and this bill will create a pathway for amnesty and all of the social welfare programs that go with it. We cannot afford this. We cannot agree to bankrupt our children and our grandchildren because of a political agenda. It is unfair, it is not right, it is un-American. And I urge all of my colleagues, consider your children, your grandchildren. 10 years ago, I myself was homeless. And under this bill, had these programs been in place, I probably would have never been able to be standing here today because the American dream is bankrupted under this bill. I urge every single one of my colleagues, think with your hearts and your heads rather than the political agenda that you have been tasked with executing. Vote for the American people.
Time has expired.
And with that, I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, you got to love these Republicans. They get up and we talk about everything but what's in this Build Back Better bill. You know, when all else fails, they get out and they bash immigrants again, blame immigrants for everything. You know, having a tough time at work, we'll blame an immigrant. Having a problem with your marriage, we'll blame immigrants. But the bottom line is they come to the floor and they tell us what they're against, but they don't tell us what they're for. I mean, this bill includes an extension of the child tax credit, which has already reduced child poverty in this country by 30%. They're against that? They're against that? We're for that. This bill actually caps the cost of insulin to $35 a month. Talk to your constituents who have to rely on insulin to save the lives of their children. I mean, really, you're against that? We're for that. You know, we actually care about our children's future. That's why there's money in here to deal with the climate crisis. Why my friends deny that there's even a climate crisis to be concerned about. So give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, this is a statement of our values. This is what we're for. We don't hear what they're for. All we hear is what they're against. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto.
Recognized.
Headline: Democrats deliver for the American people. Again. Democrats deliver for Central Florida. Again. Lowering prescription drug prices and capping costs for seniors, extending child tax credit payments, paid family leave, and lower child care costs for Central Florida families, providing nearly 1 million Floridians with an expansion of the ACA, boosting affordable housing, immigration reform, the largest effort to combat climate change in history. And unlike the GOP tax scam that busted the deficit by $400 billion and $4 trillion in debt, we pay for ours with major corporations and wealthy paying their fair share. The Republicans are doing nothing but divide. The Democrats are delivering for America. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm prepared to close. We have no further speakers. I would just inquire as to how many. I thank my good friend from Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with record high inflation and gas prices, supply chain shortages, and what's going to be the most expensive Thanksgiving on record, Democrats should focus on addressing real economic crises that are facing real Americans and real American workers every day. But instead, this bill before us would actually double lower and middle class income earners' chances of being audited. It would make it more expensive for them to heat their homes and fill their gas tanks. And it will actually drive businesses and jobs overseas, further damaging our economy. Democrats are extending tax breaks in this bill, extending tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, and jamming through far left radical policies that will only drive prices higher and make our paychecks lower. If President Biden and congressional Democrats get their way, average Americans will be pinching pennies while our country's coastal elites will be legally evading taxes and getting tax subsidies and tax breaks to put another Tesla in their 5-car garage. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to vote no. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I get it. Republicans are never going to support this bill. Maybe they don't want to see health care coverage expanded, or maybe they don't want to see insulin costs capped, or maybe they don't want to see education costs lowered, or families given a tax break, or workers given paid family and medical leave. Maybe they will just never support anything President Biden likes. I don't know. I've given up trying to get in the heads of Republicans long ago. But I do know this. Tonight, we have a chance to advance a historic bill that will truly change people's lives for the better. I mean, this is why I ran for Congress. This is why so many of my colleagues on the Democratic side ran for Congress. Not to help people just a little bit, not to solve only a few of the problems that they face, but to truly take their challenges head on. This bill does that. And I have a sneaking suspicion that despite all the doom and gloom from the Republicans today, they will be proven just as wrong here as they were when they objected to the Affordable Care Act nearly a decade ago. Build Back Better meets this moment. And by passing this rule and advancing this legislation, this Congress will too. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The previous question is ordered.
Madam Speaker, with that, I'd request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Okay, in the drawer. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lawson, I, House, vote Mr. Lawson yes on H Resolution 803.
Does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Welsh of Vermont, I inform the House that Mr. Welsh will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on the previous. Question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Davids, I inform the House that Ms. Davids will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Letlow of the state of Louisiana, I inform the House that Ms. Letlow will vote nay on the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Loudermilk of Georgia, I inform the House that Mr. Loudermilk will vote nay on the previous question.
8. I inform the House that Mr. Kerry will vote no on the previous question. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Bill Johnson of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote no on the previous question on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Peter DeFazio, I inform the House that Mr. DeFazio will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Green of Tennessee, I inform the House that Mr. Green will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Dingell, I inform the House that Ms. Dingell will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Kelly of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Kelly will vote no on the previous question. And also, as the member designated by Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Dr. Joyce will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Aloha ahi ahi, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. Moulton, I inform the House that Mr. Moulton will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hagedorn of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Hagedorn will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Curtis of Utah, I will inform the House that Mr. Curtis will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Stewart of Utah, I inform the House that Mr. Stewart will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. McMorris-Rogers, I inform the House of Washington. I inform the House that Ms. McMorris-Rogers will vote nay on the previous question. And Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. Herrera-Butler, I inform the House that Ms. Herrera-Butler will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Burgess of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Burgess will vote no on the previous question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Carl of Alabama, pursuant to H.R. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carl will vote nay on the previous question. Roll time.
Purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Stauber of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Stauber will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Garbarino, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Garbarino will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Katko of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Katko will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on the previous question.
what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Liu of California pursuant to House Resolution 8, I rise to inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote aye on the previous question.
Purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. G.T. Thompson of the Great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will be voting no on the previous question.
Does the gentlelady from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on the previous question. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on the previous question.
Gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Trone, I inform the House Mr. Trone will vote yes on the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer, I inform the House Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, I inform the House Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To my friend, Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Emmer of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Emmer intends to vote nay on the previous question. As a member designated by Mr. Cawthorn of North Carolina, I inform the House that Mr. Cawthorn will vote no on the previous question. As a member designated by Mr. Lamborn from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn from Colorado intends to vote no.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Tiffany from the great state of Wisconsin, I inform the House that Mr. Tiffany will be a nay on the previous question. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Duncan of South Carolina, I inform the House that Mr. Duncan will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Zeldin of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Zeldin will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Member designated by Ms. Salazar from Florida, I inform the House that Ms. Salazar will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Jimenez, I inform the House that Mr. Jimenez will vote nay on the previous question. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Mast, I inform the House that Mr. Mast will vote nay on the previous question. And Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Buchanan, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose is the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Rice, I inform the House that Ms. Rice will vote yes on the previous question.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 210. The previous question is ordered. The question is now on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
on that I'd request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will now record their votes by electronic device. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Welsh of Vermont, I inform the House that Mr. Welsh will vote aye on HRes 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek
Mr.
recognition?
Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Zeldin, New York, I inform the House that Mr. Zeldin will vote nay on the rule. As a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote nay on the rule. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Duncan of South Carolina, I inform the House that Mr. Duncan will vote nay on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Roybal-Allard, I inform the House that Ms. Roybal-Allard will vote yes on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Jackson, the great state of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Jackson will vote no on the rule. As a member designated by Mr. Fallon from the great state of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Fallon will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Rush from Illinois, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on HRes 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Ferguson of Georgia, I inform the House that Mr. Ferguson will vote nay on the rule. Thank you.
For what purposes generated from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on HRES 803. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Green of Tennessee, I inform the House that Mr. Green will vote nay on the rule.
For what purposes the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer, I inform the House Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on HRES 803. As member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, I inform the House Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on HRES 803. And as the member designated by Mr. Trone, I inform the House Mr. Trone will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Burgess of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Burgess will vote nay on the rule. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Where's that? Arizona. For what purposes the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Patrick, I inform the House that Mr. Patrick will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mrs. Hartzler of Missouri, I inform the House that Mrs. Hartzler will vote nay on the rule.
Purposes the generated from Florida seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Kathleen Rice of New York, I inform the House that Ms. Rice will vote yes on HRES 803.
Indiana. For what purposes the generated from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Reed of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Reed will vote no on the rule.
For what purposes the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson votes yes on H Resolution 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Nunes of California, I inform the House that Mr. Nunes will vote no on the rule. As the member designated by Mr. Calvert of California, I inform the House that Mr. Calvert will vote no on the rule. And as a member designated by Mr. Issa will vote no on the rule.
For what purposes the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Davids, I inform the House that Ms. Davids will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Stauber of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Stauber will vote nay on the rule.
For what purposes generated from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purposes the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Amadei, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Amadei will vote no on the House Resolution 803. Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Carey, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carey will vote no on House Resolution 803.
The gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama, whose state nut is the pecan, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bill Johnson of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote no on adoption of the rule, House Resolution 803, providing further consideration of H.R. 5376.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Underwood of Illinois, I inform the House that Ms. Underwood will vote yes on H.Res. 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Dr. Joyce will vote no on the resolution. And as the member designated by Mr. Kelly of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Kelly will vote no on the resolution.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Krishnamurthy, I inform the House that Mr. Krishnamurthy will vote yes on H.Res. 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. David Joyce of the state of Ohio, pursuant to the House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Joyce will vote nay on H.Res. 803. As the Speaker, or as the member designated by Mr. Adam Kinzinger of the state of Illinois, pursuant to the House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Kinzinger will vote nay on H.Res. 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H.Res. 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Kind of Wisconsin, I inform the House that Mr. Kind of Wisconsin will vote aye on H.Res. 803.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Lesko of Arizona, I inform the House that Ms. Lesko will vote no on the rule. As the member designated by Mr. LaHood of Illinois, I inform the House that Mr. LaHood will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Peter DeFazio of Oregon, I inform the House that Mr. DeFazio will vote yes on H.R. 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Fitzpatrick will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Ms. Laurie Trahan of Massachusetts and pursuant to House Resolution 8, I'd like to inform the House that Ms. Trahan will vote yes on H.R. 803, the rule providing for further consideration of H.R. 536, the Build Back Better Act. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Garbarino pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Garbarino will vote nay on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Barragan, I inform the House that Ms. Barragan will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Texas, I'll inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Swalwell, I inform the House that Mr. Swalwell will vote aye on HRES 803. As a member designated by Mr. Khanna, I inform the House that Mr. Khanna will vote aye on HRES 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
What am I doing here? Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Carl of Alabama, I inform the House that Mr. Carl will vote nay on the rule.
Does the gentlewoman from Delaware seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Brown of Maryland, I inform the House that Mr. Brown will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated for Mr. Tom Tiffany from the great state of Wisconsin, I inform the House that Mr. Tiffany will be a nay on the rule. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Chairman Johnson will vote yea on HRES 803. As the member designated by Chairman Gregory Meeks pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Chairman Meeks will vote yea on HRES 803. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on HRES 803. The member designated by Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Congresswoman Strickland will vote yea on HRES 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hagedorn of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Hagedorn will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on HRES 803. And as the member designated by Mr. Donald Payne, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote yes on HRES 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Salazar, Mr. Jimenez, Mr. Mass, Mr. Buchanan. I inform the House that Ms. Salazar, Mr. Jimenez, Mr. Mass, Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Aloha ahi ahi, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. Moulton, I inform the House that Mr. Moulton will vote yes on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Harshbarger of Tennessee, I inform the House that Ms. Harshbarger will vote nay on the rule. Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Long of Missouri, I inform the House that Mr. Long will vote nay on the rule. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Liu of California under House Resolution 8, I rise to inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote aye on House Resolution 803.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Crenshaw of Oklahoma, I inform the House that Mr. Crenshaw will vote no on the present on the rule.
Does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote yes. He will vote yes on H.Res. 803. As a member designated by Mr. Cleaver of Missouri, I inform the House that Mr. Cleaver will vote yes on H.Res. 803.
The gentleman from Alabama seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Brooks from Alabama, I inform the House that Mr. Brooks will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Comer of Kentucky, I inform the House that Mr. Comer will vote no on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Cawthorn of North Carolina, inform the House that Mr. Cawthorn will vote no on the rule. As a member designated by Mr. Lamborn of Colorado, I inform the House that Mr. Lamborn will vote no. And as a member designated by Mr. Emmer of Minnesota, I inform the House that Mr. Emmer will vote no on the rule.
Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. G.T. Thompson of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will be voting no on the rule.
Does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Curtis from Utah, I inform the House that Mr. Curtis will vote nay on the rule. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Stewart from Utah, I inform the House that Mr. Stewart will vote nay on the rule. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. McMorris-Rogers, I inform the House that Ms. McMorris-Rogers will vote nay on the rule. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. Herrera-Butler, I inform the House that Ms. Herrera-Butler will vote nay on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Letlow of Louisiana, I inform the House that Ms. Letlow will vote nay on the rule. As the member designated by Mr. Loudermilk of Georgia, I inform the House that Mr. Loudermilk will vote nay on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Katko of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Katko will vote nay on the rule.
yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of H.R. 5376 will now resume. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 94, H.R. 5376, a bill to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of Senate Concurrent Resolution 14.
Pursuant to House Resolution 803, the further amendment printed in House Report 117 to 175 is considered as adopted. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal, has 9 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, has 11 minutes remaining. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased at this time to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, the majority leader and a real champion of this institution, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is November 18th, 2021. Those of us who serve in the Congress of the United States on this date will be able to tell our children and our children's children that we were there when the United States Congress passed one of the most transformational bills in the history of the Congress for the people. Tonight, House Democrats will vote on the Build Back Better Act, as will House Republicans. Legislation to transform our country by making opportunities available and equitable for all Americans. Its name, of course, refers to the broad recognition that too many Americans are just barely getting by in our economy. And we simply cannot go back to the way things were before the pandemic. We have to ensure our people can access the tools and resources they need, not just to survive, but to succeed. This bill does so by making investments in 4 key areas. First, it will invest in child care, universal pre-K, and home care so that more Americans can get back to the workforce and grow our economy. Secondly, it further expands the Affordable Care Act coverage, reduces out-of-pocket costs, caps insulin at $35 for everyone, and finally gives Medicare the tools and authority to negotiate lower drug prices for seniors, just as we do for veterans. Thirdly, it will bring down the everyday costs for housing and higher education that make it harder for Americans to secure a place in our middle class. And fourth, the Build Back Better Act makes the largest commitment toward addressing the climate crisis ever considered by any nation in history. Mr. Speaker, in all 4 of these critical areas, the Build Back Better Act will make transformational investments that will help more Americans access opportunities and achieve greater economic security. This bill is truly for the people, not just those who have much, but those who have too little. Many Americans are looking at the investments
this bill would make in America's workers and families and asking, how are we going to afford it? My friends on the other side of the aisle have raised that, and I'm sure will raise it again. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, this bill does not raise taxes from households or small businesses earning less than $400,000 a year. In fact, the Build Back Better Act would provide a tax cut, contrary to the rhetoric I've heard on the other side of the aisle, to 80% of American households next year. Not only that, but it will raise revenue, according to the Treasury Department and outside analysis. My Republican friends should be excited that we give a tax cut essentially to 80% of Americans, not just 1%. By most estimates, this bill reduces the deficit. This bill reduces the deficit. It also ensures that all of us will pay our fair share to support our democracy. The impact of this historic legislation will be reflected in the greater economic security of millions of families and in the growth and competitiveness of a robust American economy. President Biden said, in fact, very truthfully, this will be transformational. And it will be measured in the deeper sense of hope that Americans will have when they see their economy working for them instead of holding them back. I am hopeful that the Senate acts quickly to pass this bill under reconciliation, even while Republicans all sit on the sidelines on this historic moment. Just as all but 13 of them did when we passed a transformational infrastructure investment bill, which will make America competitive in the 21st century and make businesses in America grow and succeed. Democrats will not rest until all Americans have the tools to build back better, to access opportunities to get ahead, to achieve real economic security, and to reach for the American dream that has been this country's promise for generations. This bill, Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning, is for the people, all the people, the little people, the big people, all the people. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to be able to say on November 18, 2021, I voted for that legislation, which made America, as John Kennedy said, a great country, even greater. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland yields. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
So, America, the results are in. And now we know it was all nonsense, just nonsense. The claim that this costs zero and reduces the national debt, nonsense. This bill, even counting the budget gimmicks, is several $100 billion short today, and the Independent Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget says over 10 years it's closer to $3 trillion national debt. It won't tax the middle class, nonsense. The Joint Committee on Taxation and the Liberal Tax Policy Center both confirmed that up to 1/3 of middle-class Americans will see a tax increase starting next year. This will make the wealthy pay their fair share, more nonsense. 2 out of 3 millionaires in America will see a huge tax cut in this bill. And this will reduce inflation, nonsense. Even the president's own favorite analyst, Moody's, admits Americans ought to brace for higher prices for the next decade because of this bill and the infrastructure in the COVID stimulus bill. But there is more than just nonsense in this bill. There are dangerous provisions dealing with the IRS. Mr. Speaker, at the appropriate time, I'll offer a motion to recommit the bill to the Budget Committee. I'll also ask unanimous consent to include the text of an amendment in the record I would have offered had the rules allowed me to offer instructions with my motion to recommit. My amendment is simple. It stops Democrats from unleashing 80,000 new IRS agents on American taxpayers. And more importantly, it blocks the House and the Senate from ever imposing a dangerous bank surveillance scheme targeting America's families, farmers, and small businesses. The truth is the IRS doesn't need your private information. It has a record of targeting Americans based on their political beliefs. In fact, this year, they discriminated again against a nonprofit focused on biblical teachings and continues to fail to stop massive leaks of private taxpayer returns to the media. Our Democrats colleagues claim that bank surveillance is not in there yet. The Biden White House is still insisting, so join with us, accept this motion, and stop it right now, once and for all. I ask unanimous consent for the text of the amendment to be included in the record.
Without objection.
You know, Americans need to know what's in this bill. And under this $4 trillion Biden-Pelosi scheme, let's look at a day in your life. So you wake up in the morning and pay a heat your home tax. You shower and get ready and pay a consumer products tax. Drop your kids off at child care and pay a toddler tax. Drive to work paying higher gas prices. Take a break and pay a bigger nicotine tax. At work, your company pays a Made in America tax, a small business surtax, or a tax on your retirement plan. On the way home, you swing through your pharmacy and pay a no generics tax. Stop for groceries and pay the Biden inflation tax on everything you need. And then you get your mail on the way home and you get a letter from the IRS, you're being audited. And then you're getting the kids ready for bed and you realize Democrats are forcing you to send $12,500 of your taxes to the wealthy neighbor to subsidize their luxury Beamer electric vehicle. Plus, they're getting a massive salt tax windfall for the wealthy while you get nothing except 80,000 new IRS agents to make sure, quote, you pay your fair share. So, when your head finally hits the pillow, as you lie awake in bed too worried to sleep, in a community less safe, in housing more expensive, in a country that lurches from crisis to crisis, ask yourself this question. Under Joe Biden, is my life truly built back better? Americans already know the answer. Americans already know the answer. That's why this president's polling is at the bottom of the heap, and why Americans have lost any confidence in his competence to heal this economy. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just before I recognize the distinguished majority whip, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the around-the-clock work of the staff who made this evening possible. Our team My team on the Ways and Means Committee have helped bring about this evening. They have poured their hearts into developing these policies that will make America a better place. In their pursuit, they have sacrificed holidays, sleep, time with loved ones, and their service to our country will not be forgotten. Let me also ask the CBO for a round of applause because of the great work that they've done this evening as well. And legislative councils who have not put down pencils to make sure that this extraordinary pressure that they've been under has helped to get us here. Now, always a pleasure to recognize a gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn, for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Neal. This Build Back Better bill is the third leg of a three-legged stool that balances the American Rescue Plan, signed by President Biden last March, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill signed by President Biden last Monday. These three bills provide the wherewithal to fix our roads and bridges, repair our rails, deepen our harbors, and provide long-awaited broadband to households and neighborhoods. Mr. Speaker, I have often remarked that America is not in the need of being made great. It is great and has been for a long time. I often quote Alexis de Tocqueville's observation that America's greatness is not that it is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather that it has always been able to repair its faults. The Build Back Better Act will repair some long-standing faults, many of which have been exacerbated by COVID-19 and our feckless early response to it. This Build Back Better legislation will make health care accessible and affordable for 2.2 million low-income, uninsured Americans that exist in the Medicaid coverage gap. It makes benefits accessible and affordable to millions of children who will be able to continue receiving the child tax credit. It will make child care and preschool accessible and affordable for children who have been struggling to get a fair start in life, and it will make housing accessible and affordable for their parents. The Build Back Better Act will make clean air and plant life on this planet accessible and affordable for future generations by taking historic steps to combat climate change. The coronavirus pandemic didn't just cause great harm for some, it exposed great harm that existed for far too long, denying far too many of our citizens access to America's greatness. Build Back Better provides an opportunity to make more of our nation's greatness accessible and affordable for all. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, the Chief Majority Whip of the Republican Conference, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague from Texas for his leadership and for yielding time. We're facing in America crisis after crisis after crisis created by President Biden's policies. Just look at some of the crises we're facing. There's an inflation crisis that's probably the worst effect on lower and middle income families. They're paying 50% more for gas. They're paying more for everything they buy at the grocery store. This Thanksgiving is expected to be the most expensive ever because of President Biden's radical agenda and all the spending, the trillions in spending that's already been done. And so what's the answer of this majority? To raise more taxes, to spend trillions more dollars, jacking up inflation even higher. And who is it to benefit? Let's look at the Joint Committee on Taxation, who just came out with an assessment of this. You know who benefits the most in this bill? The largest decreases go to those making $1 million or more. That's right. The largest tax cuts go to the multimillionaires. Do you know who gets the smallest tax cuts? The smallest go to those making $40,000 to $50,000. They get the least amount. And where are they paying for it? They're paying for it in a natural gas tax. Everybody who uses natural gas to heat their home this winter is going to be paying about 30% more for what? To give tax breaks to millionaires in 5 states. And don't just take Joint Committee on Taxation's word for it. Let's listen to Bernie Sanders, the chairman of the Budget Committee. Do you know what he just said yesterday about this? You can't be a political party that talks about demanding the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes and then end up with a bill that gives large tax breaks to millionaires. That's what Bernie Sanders said. He also said the hypocrisy of that is too strong, giving tax breaks to millionaires in this bill. And for what? So that low-income families who are paying it can then see their tax dollars go to give $450,000 checks to people that come here illegally. That's right, you're going to be paying 30% more on your household electricity bills for 87,000 more IRS agents who President Biden said wants to comb through your bank accounts. If you make more than $10,000, not the millionaires and billionaires, if your grandmother on a fixed income makes $10,000, 87,000 IRS agents will be unleashed on her bank account to then go and give $450,000 checks to people who came here illegally. Stop this madness. Did you not pay attention to the results of the Virginia election just 2 weeks ago? They said enough of the spending in Washington. Let's focus on helping those hardworking families who are being crippled by this inflation. This will only be made worse if you throw trillions more dollars in taxes and spending onto this dumpster fire. Let's save America. Stop, defeat this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of reasons tonight that this legislation has come forth. We can argue about why income inequality in America happened: globalization, technology, skill set, the decline of unions. But what we can't argue about is it happened. And we have a chance tonight to reverse that course. We speak frequently in this institution, sometimes in terms of hyperbolic rhetoric, about history. Tonight, the vote we cast is about history. And the Ways and Means Committee, since spring of a year ago, wrote much of this legislation. I want to call attention, as I did 33 years ago when I joined this institution, to just above the Speaker's rostrum, that it's very hard to visualize. It was easier 33 years ago for me to read it than it is now when I walk in. But Daniel Webster said, here in this chamber, let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its great powers, build up its institutions, promote all of its great interests, and see whether we in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, that's what we intend to do. We're going to make transformational changes that are going to lift the people of America to a new sense, born of optimism, as that son of Massachusetts, Mr. Webster, acknowledged. We're going to change the lives and livelihoods of Americans for generations to come. And as he noted, we will do something tonight that truly will be worth remembering. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the Republican leader of our conference, the gentleman from California, Leader McCarthy.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Mr. Brady for his work. Mr. Speaker, we are minutes away from voting on a $5 trillion, more than 2,000-page bill. The House is not in order, Mr. Speaker.
Spend. Gentleman's recognized.
A bill that the White House Chief of Staff recently bragged is twice as big in real dollars as the New Deal was. Mr. Speaker, I just listened to Congressman Neal to build up the institutions. I've heard that in a lot of different countries, countries that are a different philosophy than America. Let that sink in for 1 minute. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
Let that sink in. More than 2,000 pages, $5 trillion, twice as big in real dollars as the New Deal was. Let me be clear. Never in American history has so much been spent at one time. At one time. Never in American history will so many taxes be raised and so much borrowing be needed to pay for all this reckless spending. I listened to my friend Steny Hoyer earlier. He started his speech by stating this date, because this is the date he's going to tell his children's children where he spent all that money. Every page of all this new Washington spending will be paid for or borrowed from you, the American hardworking taxpayer. Every page of this new Washington spending supports more waste, more fraud, more abuse, and more corruption. And every page of this new Washington spending shows just how irresponsible and out of touch the Democrats are to the challenges that America faces today. Nowhere in 2,000 pages and $5 trillion in spending are measures for more efficiency, better results, or just genuine accountability. This is the single most reckless and irresponsible spending bill in our nation's history.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Suspend.
It's all right, I got all night. Some of its effects will be quickly felt, others not for a few years. But I guarantee you that no matter the time frame, all the new Washington spending in this bill is only the beginning of disaster being thrust upon us. This year, Washington has reached the highest level of sustained federal spending since World War II. That's this Congress history. It took 4 years and $4.1 trillion to win World War II in dollar terms. It was the most expensive war in history. By contrast, in the fiscal year we just finished, Washington, under one-party rule, has spent $6.8 trillion. And that's on top of the trillions of dollars Congress spent the year before in the heart of the pandemic to offer relief to struggling Americans. Today, House Democrats want to pass more wasteful, unnecessary spending by Washington. The American people obviously know this bill won't cost $0. Mr. Speaker, I wonder why people waited for the CBO score if it said it cost more but still want to vote for it. The CBO score says in 5 years it's going to cost $800 billion. In 10, more than 357. That's what your children's children will have to pay. And they'll mark this day that it happened. We know it means more crushing debt for the 330 million Americans and generations to come. The Democrats are showing once again that they are not focused on the financial health and well-being of the citizens of our economy. Instead, Democrats are focused on themselves, their lobbyists, and their special interest group. If I sound angry, I am.
Gentleman's recognized.
I don't think the generations will laugh at the spending of what you do tonight. I don't think they'll laugh about the continuing inflation you will create. I don't think they'll laugh about $1 going to support or defend the border. I do not think they'll laugh at the benefit that China will get from this bill. It is clear to us that this bill is wrong on the merits, and they have responded with a single word the American public have said: enough. Enough with Washington waste, enough with fraud, Washington abuse, and Washington corruption. Enough with higher taxes, higher prices, and higher borrowing. Simply enough. Today, millions of Americans are struggling with higher energy costs, higher grocery prices, and higher crime. This isn't politics, as the Democrats claim. This is real life in America today under one-party rule in 1 year. When our country doesn't have the resources or won't commit them to fund the basic needs of our citizen, like basic human security, nothing else matters. And yet at this very moment, the Democrats are preparing to go on yet another unnecessary spending binge. Then in a couple weeks, they'll have the audacity to ask Congress to raise the debt limit, to borrow more on the overspending. I look forward to that debate as well. My colleagues on the other side often say that what Washington borrows and spends doesn't matter, that the lessons of history don't apply here. They also said the bill wouldn't cost money. Those Democrats are wrong, plain and simple. Spending your money that we do not have on programs you do not want is not the solution. In fact, it's the problem with Washington. And it's getting worse every single day one-party rule is in this city. So many Democrats refuse to fund our police. So many Democrats refuse to fund genuine security at our borders. They only want to spend your tax dollars on programs that benefit them politically. As the leader of the Republicans in the House, I say on behalf of the tens of millions of citizens we proudly represent, enough already. My principle is simple. Don't spend what you don't have, and certainly on what you don't want and need. And my fellow Americans, we don't have trillions of dollars to spend on programs that will never go away. The American people understand what this out-of-control spending will do, because they felt it from your very first bill you passed. You created inflation. But the first thing that was said, it's just temporary. Our own president said he doesn't know of any economist that's worried about inflation. Go to the grocery store. Just stand in line at your gas station. Just talk to one of your constituents. They'll tell you, because they feel it every single day. The American people understand what will happen. They understand because they live it in their own lives responsibly, because they set priorities, and because they live within their means. If they do it every day, why can't Washington? Why can't Washington ever say no? Many of you said you were going to say no. You couldn't vote for it until you got the CBO score because you wanted to hold them accountable that it couldn't cost money. You got the CBO score. It cost $800 billion in the first 5 years. What are you going to say to your constituents when they ask you that question of why you held it up? Why did you want the paper then? Why did you want to know? Math is hard, I guess. But make no mistake, overspending is just the start of how this bill is so completely out of touch with the needs of our people. Its destructive policies should also alarm every single American. I think we should talk about that. Since we debated it all during the day, but a new bill came tonight. But you let us have 20 minutes, 10 minutes on each side to further that debate. Much of that was to pat yourselves on the back. In my remarks, I'll go through each of these provisions in more detail. But first, let me tell you why I oppose this bill. It will crush American industries. It will destroy countless American jobs, more than have already been shut down while you destroyed American energy independence and rely on OPEC. And as the price of gas goes higher, I hear from the White House, that might be a good thing. Mr. Speaker, you're from my home state. We're both from California. $4.50 is the average. You and I drive past those gas stations, we see them even higher than $5. You know who that hurts the most? The hardest working Americans. That was driven by much of the policies from this administration. You know, I heard my good friend, Steny Hoyer, and he is my friend and we disagree. But we disagree respectfully. And there's something I disagree that you said earlier, Steny. You said we can't go back to where we were before the pandemic. I want to go back when we didn't have inflation. I want to go back when the border was secure. I want to go back when I didn't pay $4.50 for gas. I want to go back to where people were employed. I want to go back to when we didn't have Americans held hostage in Afghanistan. I want to go back to when we were respected around the world. I want to go back to when we didn't have North Korea testing nuclear weapons. I want to go back to when China wasn't flying over Taiwan every day and threatening and rattling. And when China would not offend us on our own soil. I want to go back to when Russia didn't have thousands of their troops along the Ukraine border. Yeah, I want to go back. Because if we go forward with this bill, we won't have the resources for the things we need. I want to go back to when we didn't catch those on the terrorist watch list coming across our border. I think if you simply read the polls, America wants to go back. If you listened to last 2 Tuesdays ago, I think they said they want to go forward, but back to what they knew, the policies that worked. You know, history sometimes repeats itself. I wasn't here 33 years. I don't know if I was old enough 33 years ago to run. But I was here in 2010. I watched the wake-up call in Virginia and New Jersey, and then I watched this exact same speaker 4 days later walk the Democratic members right down here and pass Obamacare and lose 63 seats. I wondered why she wouldn't wake up to what the American people said. He just got a bigger wake-up call in Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Minneapolis, where this body of the majority championed defunding the police. They said no. In Seattle, yes, I say Seattle, they had elected a Republican and the city attorney that believes in law and order. New Jersey, we got good news and bad news out of New Jersey. I hope you listen to the good news. Did you hear about a guy who's never run before? He was just a truck driver. He's a Republican. He spent less than $200, and he defeated the second most powerful politician that happened to be a Democrat in the Senate, the president of the Senate. That's the good news. You want to know what the bad news is? In this new Biden administration, we just lost another truck driver. I thought that was pretty good.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Its destructive policies need to alarm you all. It would pave a glide path for China while placing a devastating weight on American companies. It will hammer American workers and American families and bruising inflation. You know, it wasn't just Republicans who warned you about those $2 trillion you spent earlier in your one-party control. We warned you it'd be inflation. It wasn't just us. Summers, who worked for Clinton and Obama, he warned you. But you felt you had to go forward. You felt it was good for the American public to pay more. And it will infringe on our fundamental American rights and liberties. Here are some of the worst provisions. First, this bill massively raises prices on all products made and manufactured in the United States. It's placing a massive burden on American workers and consumers at the very moment we are under attack by Chinese Communist Party and the companies they support. My friend sitting in the speaker chair right now, his district is in California just like mine. We see those hundreds of tankers sitting off our coast. One-party rule created a supply chain problem. One-party rule is going to empower China to even have more of those tankers, because you're benefiting China over American workers. You're pushing American companies away from America. But I guess you did that in their energy as well. You just asked OPEC to produce more, and you'll ask China to produce more. This Made in America tax will send our jobs overseas, send the rest of our supply chain to China, and make us dependent on foreign producers, foreign countries, and foreign dictators.